She's audible. How's that? Can you hear me? Life is good? Well, I'm honored and humbled to be here this morning. When Gay invited me, she said I could talk about the things that she knew about me. I could talk about the Baha'i Faith. I could talk about Qigong. I could talk about writing or anything else. And I figured that left the door pretty wide open. So I've thought about what to say, and what appealed to me most was to talk about all of those things. A couple of months ago, when I was figuring out what I wanted to do when I grow up, that's been an never-ending quest, I wrote a short mission statement for myself for some guidance. It starts with, I'm a whole, integrated, loving person. Thinking about being an integrated person seemed to reinforce the idea of talking about all of it. As much as I've tried over the years to compartmentalize myself, I now realize that, in fact, I am a singular being. I am not a mom, a grandmother, a writer or writer wannabe, an educator, a Baha'i, a physical therapist, a person who wants to grow and learn. I'm one person who has all of those interests and roles. They all bump into, flow around, and affect each other. I finally realized I can't keep them in separate boxes. I'm a slow learner. I was rather pleased with that realization and looked forward to the opportunity to do some more introspection in preparation for this morning. And then I thought, right, Jan, that will draw people in droves. Everything about Jan interests me, but I doubt a few woke up driven to learn more about me today. I tried to be less self-centered. I wondered what might be of interest to other people. The idea that emerged is, how do we make choices in our lives? What needs do we want filled, and how do we go about filling them? The only data I have to answer those questions is mine, but the questions may be universal. I decided to take those thoughts out for a spin and see if they went anywhere. As I look at the paths to the three things Gay mentioned, I decided to limit myself. The Baha'i Faith, Qigong, and writing fiction, that's the chronological order they appeared in, I see some similarities. Let me briefly describe those paths, then I'll look at the commonalities that I see, and then explore the information that has for me and might be of interest to someone else. The oldest of the paths for me is to the Baha'i Faith. I actually grew up in a Unitarian church until I was about 9. I don't remember too much about it. My biggest memory is when, I don't even remember what it was called, the equivalent of baptism, when you're welcomed into the church as a child. There you go. It was a lot of years ago. It might not even be called that then. One never knows. I remember vividly the minister's hand on my head, and he was shaking. And it's like, if he's nervous, how should I be feeling? But anyway, I don't remember much about the teachings of the church. I was, in fact, 9. But they did have an impact on me through my mother and grandmother. The Unitarian church's beliefs were much closer to my mom's than the Christian churches we went to later. My mom would say things to me like, no religion teaches you to do bad things, so maybe it doesn't matter which one you are. Or, if God is loving, how could he only care about 1/7 of the world's population? Obviously, they are not Methodist and Presbyterian beliefs. Those are the denominations I tended toward after I was out of the house and married. For several years, I was pretty comfortable in the church, and we attended for a variety of reasons, but then I became uncomfortable. I won't go into those reasons now, but my husband and I recognized that we felt worse when we left church than when we entered church, and we were thinking that's not the way it was supposed to happen. We stopped going to church for several years. For me, something was missing in my life, and I was aware of that, but I wasn't actively looking for a church. Then a new secretary was hired into our office, and she was a Baha'i. She told me their beliefs. I thought they were interesting, and I was too busy to pay much attention. And Jim Jones was in South America, encouraging mass suicide with Kool-Aid. I was suspicious of this weirdly named faith, but I was curious. After studying the writings of the faith and the people and an introduction to Persian food, always a good thing, and ascertaining that Kool-Aid and mass suicide seemed to be frowned upon, I decided that it was real and that I believed it, and I became a Baha'i. That is a decision that has shaped my life more than I recognize. The next discovery pertinent to this morning is Qigong. Qigong is sort of the grandmother of Tai Chi. Several times over the years, I dabbled into Tai Chi. I always loved the graceful, slow movements. I'm not sure I ever got the moving meditation part, though. It was more of the challenge of remembering the order of the movements, maintaining balance. As a physical therapist, that hit a nerve that balance would be important, and remembering how to breathe when in the form. My husband, Bob, enjoyed it too, and it was something we did together at various times. My history of Tai Chi involvement was like my dad quitting smoking. He did it often. Eventually, it stuck. Well, I studied Tai Chi often, and it didn't stick until I learned about Qigong. Most of the principles are the same, but the movements are easier to remember, the breathing component is clearer. For me, it's much easier to get into that meditative point. Bob and I took some courses in Qigong, and we loved it. We did not do it often, but we did it occasionally, and it was good. Fast forward a couple of decades, and my husband died. That was 3 years ago. As you can imagine, after being married for 47 years, the adjustment was, and sometimes still is, difficult. One of the questions I was asking myself in the months after Bob died, what now? What's supposed to be happening now? In an effort to get out, I took a Tai Chi class locally, went on to become an instructor. Evidently, once a teacher, always a teacher. Content doesn't matter. I still had all the same issues of finding that meditative part, but I decided to press on. That's what my family does. We press on. As I was getting ready to teach the first class of my Tai Chi class, I wondered if there was anything from the Qigong stuff that I'd studied so long ago that would help with the Tai Chi class. I went online. It's a mystery. So you study this ancient thing called Qigong online. And behold, a week-long Qigong instructor course was being offered in Jacksonville, Florida. That's an easy drive, and I was ecstatic. Then I saw the date. The 1-year anniversary of Bob's death was smack in the middle of the course. I knew I wanted the family to be together that day. Well, we worked it out. I went to the course, became a practice leader, and that's how I started appearing on your doorstep regularly. I offered a weekly Qigong class on Thursday mornings, and then after a while, we started doing the Qigong for Peace on Sunday evenings. I met some dear friends in that class and learned a lot about healing and mind-body integration. It was an illuminating time. On to the third path. Somehow, during the time after Bob died, I got the bug to write. Fun stuff. I had done the professional writing thing, and even though the content was not always fun, I enjoyed the process of writing. I also enjoyed telling my kids and grandkids stories. I decided to write some stories. Then I heard about NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, November. It's a nationwide program to encourage people to write a 50,000-word novel in 1 month. Well, the first draft of the novel. I decided to participate. I committed to writing 1,667 words every day during the month of November. That was 2015. I had a blast. All of the writing I had done as a physical therapy department chairman, research, memos, books, annual reports, all of that riveting writing, stood me in good stead. I knew how to put sentences together, and I had a decent vocabulary. And thanks to my children and grandchildren, I evidently had a great imagination. Or was it the budget creation that polished my imagination? Anyway, I missed the end of November deadline, but by December I had a first draft of my book finished, and a year later it was published. I published it, but there you go. One of the things that kept me writing was to see how the book would end. I later learned there are 2 kinds of writers. There are planners and pantsers. The planners, as you might guess, plan their book, they outline it, they know what's going to happen, and they fill in the blanks. The pantsers write by the seat of their pants. They just write and hope it all fits together. That kind of writing is fun. That's what I did. I even enjoyed the editing. That was the second time in my life that it was really obvious to me that I was weird. The first was during my doctoral work, when I was sitting on my bed, surrounded by papers, books, pencils, calculator, and I was calculating an analysis of variance. And I found myself grinning. I decided that was not a typical reaction. Anyway, back to writing. I joined a writing group and consistently got feedback that people liked what I wrote. I was writing stuff that usually made people smile. Many others were writing heavy or dark stuff. I wondered if I should continue writing. Was it worth the time sink to write lighthearted stuff? It's fun, but it is a time sink. I decided that it was, that there wasn't enough entertainment out there that didn't depend on murder, sex, violence, and profanity. And personally, I was really questioning if that was appropriate for our entertainment. I enjoyed a lot of it. NCIS and Bones, the TV shows, had great characters, and I loved them for a long time. Then I started to be haunted by the atrocious things that the people were doing to each other that required the skills of the actors in the show. I'm now working with some kids to help them write creatively, and the second novel is in process. I think I have a series of 3 or 4 books. I still have trouble calling myself a writer, but I think that's what I am becoming. So those are the 3 paths I'm talking about this morning. Now the hard part. Is there anything to learn from those paths? Does the learning apply to anyone other than me? And here's what I came up with. First, all 3 happened spontaneously, and some doors opened. I didn't do anything to make them happen. They just happened. I was not actively searching for religion, but I knew I was missing one. I was open to finding a new path. Hiring a secretary, we all know what an incredibly spiritual activity that is, right? Is what opened that path. Qigong and Tai Chi were paths that Bob and I followed off and on for years. And then after Bob died, the Qigong course just happened to be offered in Jacksonville, Florida, instead of Southern California. And it was 1 year after he died. Baha'is believe that in an afterlife and believe that the souls who have passed on are responsible for much of the progress in this world. The course in Jacksonville on an emotional and meaningful date seemed like evidence of that to me. So another path opened, with a guide this time, no less. Then writing. Writing is a path I've followed all of my professional life. I wrote a research article or 2 as a clinician, books on federal contracts and grants as a research associate, memos, curriculum, annual reports, accreditation reports, course designs, yada, yada, required of a faculty member. I can't seem to pinpoint the start of the recent fictional writing. It might have been in looking for a way to meet people after Bob died, but I can pinpoint the escalation of it, and that was NaNoWriMo, November 2015. The doors that opened here were finding other writers and interacting with them, and experiencing the joy of creating a story from nothing, and not having to support it with references. In fact, the writing didn't even have to be reality-based. What freedom. The second commonality of the 3 paths, they all represent journeys. All religions are a never-ending path toward to becoming a better and better person. Improvement is always possible. I don't think anyone considers him or herself the epitome of Qigong. Greater competence, understanding, and enlightenment are always possible. And I don't think anyone reaches the pinnacle or perfection in writing. I look back at my first stories and see such flaws. I see progress as I write more. The goal is progress and improvement. There isn't a final endpoint. The third commonality of the 3 paths is that they're all highly personal. No one is a Baha'i the same way that I am. No one teaches Qigong the way I do, and no one tells the stories that I do. Those are not better than, worse than statements. They're just differences. Turning them all inward, no one can tell me what to learn or how to learn anything in the Baha'i faith, Qigong, or writing. I figure out what I want from them and how to learn and what I need, and then I go do those things. These are intensely personal pursuits. And all of these are more valuable when I give them away, the 4th commonality. When I tell others about the Baha'i faith, the goodness of the faith is multiplied. Not only does the person I'm talking to learn something, I learn something. If I share my beliefs in humility and sincerity, we probably both leave the conversation feeling better and knowing more. Teaching Qigong involves doing Qigong. When I teach Qigong, I give others the tools to heal themselves, and I'm doing it at the same time, so I heal myself while I teach a class. If several of us are healing, that means that some sickness, physical, emotional, spiritual sickness, is leaving the world. It isn't a big shift, but if each of us does a little to heal ourselves, the world becomes a better place. The only thing that I can change is myself. If I share healing tools with you, then you have a tool to change yourself. If we keep healing ourselves and sharing tools, we're doing our bit to heal the world. Baby steps. And writing becomes much more powerful when it's shared because it has the ability to influence people. Whether the influence is to create a smile or a laugh or to encourage people to engage in more positive behavior, the life-affirming ripple is started. Finally, and maybe most importantly, these three things make me happy. That seems a bit self-centered, but let's look at that just a minute. Assuming that most of us are reasonably well-adjusted, I hope, things that make us happy don't hurt others. In fact, they probably affect others in a positive way. Does it follow then that if we make a point of doing some things that make us happy, we will have a positive effect on the world? Does it follow that doing things that create more smiles in the world can make the world a better place? Could just creating one more smile a day create world peace? I think it's worth a try. I think that's what Beeb's mother was saying, one more smile a day. So, how did I get here? My eyes were opened so that I could see the doors when they opened. I stepped out onto some paths for which I did not see destinations, and in fact, there might not be destinations. I chose paths that were quite personal. They interested me and they met my needs. I found things that got better when I gave them away, and I did things that made me happy. Is that a magic formula? I doubt it. It has, however, created an interesting path as I figure out what I want to do when I grow up. Maybe that's the magic formula, believing that you always have choices for what you can do when you grow up. Are these ideas of value to anyone else? I have no idea. You are a better judge of that than I am. Thank you for allowing me to share your Sunday morning. It's been a delight to be here.